Welcome back, everybody, to another recap here on the C-Squared podcast channel. We have day 9 at the 45th Chess Olympiad in Budapest, Hungary. We have a lot of stories. We have a lot of stories on the chessboard, but also outside the chessboard. And I'm going to start with the one outside the chessboard, the drama that ensued between Team Uzbekistan and Team India before the game started, because Vladimir Kramnik, the coach and captain of Team Uzbekistan, decided to file a complaint about regarding the cell phones surrounding the top matches. And this is not a new thing. Cell phones from FIDE officials as well as ChessBase India officials who are all vetted, in my opinion, but my opinion doesn't really matter as much. I'm not playing, I'm just a commentator on this one. I'm not necessarily an official, but he said that, look, there's rules in the playing hall. You cannot have cell phones. These rules do include the fact that some people with special vetting and special accreditation can have cell phones. And Team India, ChessBase India, not Team India, ChessBase India, who are the roving reporters that obviously are following Team India, and they have been following Team India for the past many years. They were the ones that were setting up some cell phones, some cameras next to that particular match. And Vladimir did not like that, and he filed a complaint. It was taken seriously. The cell phones were in fact taken by the officials, checked, and then returned and allowed to continue filming the games and the players from Team India, but also from Uzbekistan. So this was the big drama at the beginning of the round. I don't know if that rattled any of the players around the playing hall, any of the players on both teams. I would assume that probably this was something that Vladimir discussed with his players before he initiated the appeal, maybe even before the match has started, because this has been going on for the first 9 rounds. Like, it wasn't anything new. The cell phones that were recording the games as well as the faces of the players were there for pretty much the whole duration of the Olympiad up to this point. So nothing new. And I don't know exactly what happened on Twitter. I don't know if this was a huge drama, but this is the on-site reporting that I'm giving you guys. Nothing has come out of that. The appeal was, I guess, rejected, and the phones got put back in the playing hall. Now, let's go to the chess. And the big game, actually one of the biggest game of the round and the biggest stories of the round, was Magnus Carlsen leading Team Norway, who were doing quite well up to this point. They were facing Team Slovenia. Slovenia is a much improved team compared to the last few years, because now they have Fedoseev, Alexander Fedoseev, Vladimir Fedoseev, excuse me, and Anton Demchenko, 2 very powerful former Russian players that now decided to join Team Slovenia. And this is a much improved version of Slovenia, and as we will see, Fedoseev can, and in fact will be giving Magnus quite a run for his money. Let's go and get in the game. Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces facing Vladimir Fedoseev. d4, d5, knight f3, and c5. This is, I would say, a surprise, an early surprise. I was doing commentary with Peter Zvidler, and we were discussing this and the fact that Nakamura has initiated this opening for black in quite successfully so during the candidates, but also in Norway chess. He defeated 2 very powerful opponents. One of them was Pragnananda, who Peter was his coach, and the other one in Norway chess was the world champion Ding Liren. So this is starting to become a trend, this idea of c5, d5 and c5 as soon as possible. And in the game against Pragnananda, it was coming from this particular move order, which looks even more silly, c4, and now immediately responding with c5. It looks like there's a lot of tension in the center. Back in the days, this used to be considered not so good, but right now, apparently, this is, in fact, just simply playable. Knight to f3 is Magnus's decision, c5 and c4. And now we more or less get the same situation as if white starts with d4 and c4. C takes d4, c takes d5, Knight to f6. The idea being that you cannot really take very well with the queen, because now I don't have to take on d4, but in fact I can gain another tempo, crucial tempo, because I'm already up in development as white, but I can gain another tempo with the move knight to c3. Then you retreat the queen, probably to d8, you can also go to a5, obviously, but this type of ensuing endgames, with the knights already developed, I have basically 2 extra tempis compared to your development, and this will play a major role. And in fact, you're more or less not losing, obviously, but you're facing a pretty significant deficit right now as black. So this is not the idea of the line. The idea of the line is to go knight to f6, wait for white to take on d4, and then basically just match him with knight takes d5, knight takes d4, knight takes d5, and e4. Knight to f6, and bishop to b5. Of course, you can also just play the move knight to c3 first, which will be met with the move e5, most likely. And now, once again, you have a couple of options, bishop to b5 being one of them, to try to superimpose a piece on the d file, so that whenever you move the knight, black cannot really take on d1 and force your king to take back on d1. These are kind of the ideas behind this. Bishop to b5 was the decision for Magnus, which is a very, very good move as well. One of the topical moves in this one, bishop to d7, knight to c3, and e5. Now at this point, white has a lot of options. One of them being knight to c2, the other one being a bishop to d7 as well, which was in fact played, but also knight to f5. And this is an interesting move that has not been tried very often at the top level. Maybe we will see it in future games. He decided to go bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, and knight to f5. Again, you can put this knight everywhere. Knight to b5, I think knight to c2 with the idea to pretty much gain full control over the d5 square is one of the main lines as well. Knight to f5 was the decision for Magnus. Queen takes d1, king takes d1, and knight to c6. Bishop to g5, it's all about trying to gain control over the d5 square. Now, I'm going to be able to capture your knight on f6, and most likely I will have free reign on the square d5. At the same time, you cannot say that you have free reign against my position by accessing the d4 square, because I have a protector of the d4 square, the knight on f5. Knight to g4, king to e2, and f6. Bishop to h4, h5. Obviously, if you don't play h5, then my next move is going to be h3, and whenever you return back to h6, you're not going to be able to recapture with the rook. In fact, you're going to be facing a pretty bad deficit, weakness in the position. For example, if you go castle, h3, or f3, both of them work. Just to kick the knight away, you have to go back. Now I take, and in fact, you're losing material immediately. So h5, a very good move by Fedoseev, getting ready to recapture on h6 with a rook and not have to mess the pawn structure. f3, bishop to f2, there's absolutely no reason to in fact draw the rook to h6. The only idea for white is to wait, keep the knight on f5, allow black to take on f5, and once you take back, I'm going to have access to the e4 square, which is a great square for my knight. Knight takes f5, e takes f5, castle, rook to d1, rook takes d1, rook takes d1, h4, and king to d3. I'm just going through these moves a bit quicker because there's not that much that either player can do. Sure, there might be a difference with knight to e4 before king to d3, or knight to e4 before rook to d1, but to my eyes, both of these players have played pretty much the best moves in the position. What black is trying to do is activate his rook on the king side with rook to h5, followed by rook to g5, especially once you place the pawn on h4. At this point, you don't have a choice, because you're not going to be able to get the rook to d8. You're going to lose the pawn on h4. So once you play the move h4, you're pretty much already committed to this plan. Rook to h5, king to e4, and I really like the way Magnus has played this one, getting the king in the center, defending the pawn on f5, but as we will see in just a second, maybe even including this king into the attack. It's a very intriguing and very cool plan to see. Rook to g5, rook to g1, Perhaps at this point g3 would have been a bit better in the position. g3, you take, I can take back. And now my guess is that Magnus did not like the move g6. And you have to do something as black. If you allow me to go g4 and solidify my structure, then you're going to be in trouble. So g6 is very important to be played. g4, g takes f5, g takes f5, rook to g2. And it does seem, despite the fact that white seems to be quite close to capturing the pawn on f6, either via bishop to h4, maybe even knight to d5. It seems to be quite difficult for black to, in fact, defend that pawn. But I have enough compensation. And I will take on b2, you're going to take on f6, I will go something like rook to c2, maybe I can even give you a check on b4, despite the pawn on f5, and despite the fact that this pawn is looking very threatening for my position, it seems objectively that black has enough for equality. And perhaps that this is what deterred Magnus from playing g3 immediately. He wanted to keep more tension in the position. He played the move rook to g1, g6, once again, black needs to do something and he needs to do it fast. Bishop takes h4, g takes f5, king to d5, and rook to g6. And now we see the activity of the king on d5. But wait a second, because this king on d5 right now, obviously it's an asset, but it could become a liability. Wait for it. King to e6, bishop to c5, rook to h1, knight to d4 check, and king to d5. Huge mistake, and I would say this is the decisive mistake for Magnus. At this point, he was already facing quite a significant time deficit. And this is move 26, still 14 moves to go until the time control. Big decisions to be made, not easy decisions to be made, and he made a wrong decision. What he should have done, and probably what would have created some problems for black to solve, would have been king to f7, attack the rook on g6, keep contact with the pawn on f6, rook takes g2, and bishop takes f6. What he misassessed, I should probably say, is this position, in which, as white, you sacrifice the pawn. These are pretty threatening looking pawns, the e and f5 pawns, both of them free to roam and free to be pushed. But you're the one pushing first. And after h4, in fact, it does seem quite difficult, at least from a practical perspective. Objectively, it does seem to be okay for black, but from a practical perspective, this is not looking easy. With the king on f7, specifically defending against any sort of rook coming back and trying to defend against the pawn push. Rook to g6 or rook to g8 obviously do not work. So at this point, black needs to be very careful, and it does seem like king to d7 allowing h5. And now some crazy ideas such as bishop to e3, h6, and just simply giving up the bishop. Assessing this type of position and understanding that black is fine, not easy. So Magnus decided, instead of king to f7, which would have been the best move in the position, he decided to go king to d5. He did spend a lot of time at this point on this decision. He made the wrong one. King to d5, b6, because right now, after f4, king to d7 is perhaps what Magnus has missed. And in fact, black is starting to realize a very dangerous looking setup in which the white king can easily get in trouble, easily can get checkmated. g4, huge mistake, which basically could have lost the game instantaneously. What he should have done was take on e5, but already at this point, after rook takes g2, you can take on f6, but after knight to f3, you're starting to realize the fact that the bishop is in a really bad shape, but also the king is not doing amazing. For example, first of all, f7 doesn't really do much, because the bishop is protecting against f8, so I can just simply take the bishop on h4. If you try to come back to g3, then I can give you a check. You go back to c4, it's the only square that you still have, and now I have this beautiful move f4. You cannot touch that pawn. I mean, you can, but you're going to lose after rook to d4. That's a check, that's a double attack. You lose the bishop on f4, you lose the game. So at this point, my guess is that Magnus was already starting to panic. He played the move g4, trying to find a way out for his king. But in fact, this one loses on the spot, but not to an easy tactic, as we shall see. Knight to c2 is the best move in the position, the move that finishes, in fact, the game, because once you take on f5 right now, and this is the key to this position, now I go rook to g4. I'm going to use all of my pieces, including the king, including the pawn on b6, to checkmate the white king. For example, if you take on f6 with the bishop, now I take, and I have a huge threat. If you take with the bishop on e5, this is checkmate in one move. If you play bishop to g5, then what I can do is just simply go knight to e3, you take on e5 by force, there's no other square in the position, and then I just simply take on f5, collect the bishop on g5, I'm going to be a piece up, and you're basically dead lost. So at this point, after rook to g4, after knight to c2, white is just simply completely busted. If you take once again rook to g4, this is the key move, attacking the bishop but also setting up the checkmate. And now rook to f4, if you take with the king, and perhaps this is something that he missed, now you go bishop to d6 and you give the checkmate in reverse order. Not knight to e3, but bishop to d6 first and knight to e3. Beautiful concept. Unfortunately for Fedoseev, he did not see it and allowed, in fact, Magnus to get back into the game. F takes g4, take on e5, knight to e4, knight to f3, knight takes c5, and perhaps this was a pretty critical mistake. What he had to do is preserve the knight on e4. This is a beautiful knight. What you have to do is just simply go bishop to g3. Keep the knight on e4. The knight, not only that it looks towards potentially knight f6 at the right moment, maybe supporting the h-pawn if you manage to at some point take the pawn from g4 off the board, but also very much protecting against any sort of checks. So it's a very good defensive piece as well. I really don't understand this decision from Magnus to take on c5, but again, he's Magnus. I'm not going to question too many things about his level of play. The guy is just ridiculous in general. He just had a bad day at the office, and he made some bad decisions throughout this game. But kudos to Fedoseev, because at this point he was already putting a lot of pressure on his opponent's clock, and Fedoseev has been somewhat of a difficult opponent for Magnus. Fedoseev, I believe, beat him in rapid and blitz, not consistently, but a few times. Not in classical chess, of course. This is the first victory for Fedoseev in classical chess, and I think they met 3 times before this game. Knight takes c5. Bad move, because right now you're simply just allowing me to roam freely. And after bishop to g3, rook to d6, very nice move. You take the pawn, but now I get active and I still have this weapon. The e-pawn is the weapon. The e-pawn is basically going to force you to sacrifice a piece for it. And your rook is more or less stuck right now. You cannot go h3, unfortunately, because of a rook to g2. You take on e5, and basically at this point you're pretty much forced to give away your piece. If you try to preserve it with bishop to e1, then I can just simply go g3. I'm going to take, I might even go rook to h2. In fact, rook to h2 is a big threat in the position. Rook to h2. If you take, I take with the pawn, I queen next move, and that's all she wrote. And if you try to get away from that, I still queen after g2 and g1 next. So you're pretty much busted at this point. Rook to d2, my pieces are very active. The defense is almost impossible for a human. And he played rook to c1, which pretty much allows black to have a winning position. What he should have done was a4, but understanding the fact that you're not completely losing in this endgame, and you're not, you might still have a chance at survival just because your rook is getting active. For example, rook to d1, king to e7, rook to d5, forcing more or less the king to go on the 6th rank, and then I can transfer my rook to the a file. Rook to d6, followed by rook to h6 or rook to a6, and both of them are giving white better chances of survival. In the game, he played rook to c1, king to e6, a very good move, not taking on b2 first, because this would allow the king to get back in the center. And that's going to allow me to get closer to your main weapon, your main main weapon in the position, and that is the pawn on e5. So king to e6, not forcing matters, not speeding the process. but just simply controlling the position. King to e6, very nice move by Fedoseev. Rook to c4, king to f5, protecting the pawn on g4 and supporting the push of the e-pawn. Rook to a4, knight takes h2, everything comes with tempo, and at this point, Magnus more or less understood that he's lost. He could have taken on a7, but this is not going to help him for a very particular reason. There's a lot of winning moves right now. Rook to c2 is one of them. Simply picking up the pawn is another one. But the most effective one, and my guess is this is what Magnus didn't like, was in fact knight to f3. Knight to f3. You go before, and now I'm just simply trapping the bishop on g3. It's a ridiculous position, but you simply don't have any squares that you can put the bishop on. And you're simply too slow. You can go b5, I'm taking on g3, you go b6, I go rook to g2, you go b7, I go rook to b2, and I finally cut your pawn. So very nice position, very nice conversion by Fedoseev. Bishop takes h2 was the move chosen by Magnus. At this point he realized that he's losing. Take on a7, take on b2, now it's 2 versus 1, a4, rook to c2, g3. That's the problem. I have 2, you only have 1. It's a powerful pawn, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to be able to catch it with my rook, and in the meantime I'm going to utilize my king and the 2 pawns to force resignation. a5, rook to b2, king to c6, rook to a2, king to b6, e4, a6, e3, rook to f7, and now I'm going to hide my king on g2 so that this rook controls the e-file and helps with the promotion. a7, e2, rook to e7, king to f2, king to e3, king to d2, king to c1, and now I'm just actually running to a1. It's a very funny looking position. Generally, whenever you see this position, you assume that it is black who you're looking from, the side of black that you're looking from, with the pawn on h2 and the pawn on d7 and b6, and it's probably a draw. But obviously, it's reversed. The board is reversed. I'm ready for promotion. There's no way for you to stop either of my pawns. So this was a crucial game of the round, and the first, actually the first loss for Magnus in this competition with the white pieces. The first loss for Magnus in a long time. Obviously, kudos to Fedoseev, incredible player, incredible play, and I have to say the conversion. Outplaying Magnus in an endgame is never easy. It's one of the hardest tasks in chess, and he managed to do so. And now I just want to show you guys a couple of key moments from some of the other big matches. We're going to start with this one, the clash between the United States and the host country, Hungary. They were both 3 points behind the leader. India going into this one, obviously in need, very much in need of winning their respective match. And Leonid Dominguez is right now facing Sjugirov. This is a very topical line of the Najdorf. And at this point, Sjugirov makes a huge mistake. They were both playing more or less a la tempo up to this point, except Lenier perhaps was trying to spend some time and remember his knowledge. But Sjugirov was at 1 hour and 28, obviously has not spent a lot of time on his clock. And the best move, and the move that is known to be a theoretical move, is queen to a5. He played rook to a5. Something, I don't know what, prompted him to play the move rook to a5, and he played it quite quickly in about 10 minutes, which is not a lot for this type of heavy moment and this type of very difficult position to assess. Rook to a5 is a double question mark move. It's a really bad move, specifically for a very beautiful reason, which Lanier did not see. He started off well, bishop takes e6, king to h8, but now what he had to do was in fact the simple move of just simply picking up the pawn on b4. What he was afraid of was d5, and at this point you really need to see the next move. If you don't see it, then you're not better in the position, because black is getting tremendous compensation. If you just drop back with the queen, I'm going to go d4, and in fact my attack is going to continue. With your pieces, white's pieces, the bishop will have to go to g1. It's really bad. So what you have to do is bishop to b6. It's a beautiful move, very easy to miss, very nice concept. If you take with the queen, I'm just simply picking up the bishop on e7. Now your knight is on pre. If you move the knight, you lose the rook on f8. You're not checking me in time. You're not checkmating me in time. I just simply have too many pieces around my king. You're pretty much lost. So after a bishop to b6, you have to take with a knight, but then I just simply pick up the rook on a5. So he missed this. Lanier missed this, and he played the move knight to g3. Now, fast forward a few moves, rook to f1, rook to a1, king to c2, and we got to this endgame, which, to be honest, is very close to equal, but not yet equal. If this pawn, for example, from b3 would be on a2, the position would be winning for white because I would just simply go king to b3 and push my pawn. But with the double pawns like this, it's not going to be easy to take the pawn b4 from black without giving up some material on the king side, either of these two pawns. Bishop to a7, but right now the masterclass from Lanier begins. Bishop to c8, knight to g2, bishop to f2 to defend the pawn on h4, h6, g takes, no, sorry, not g takes h6, king to d3, he wants to get the king to c4. You're still having some problems, and the big problem in the position for black is what to do with this knight on f8. The knight on g2 also is kind of out of play. Take with the knight, knight to h7, and once again, I just want to focus on the key moments of this game because I want to look at other games as well. King to g7, king to c4, knight to f6, knight to g5, knight to g4, bishop to c5, and a big blunder arises. What he had to do at this point, and he was very close to achieving full equality, was to take on c5. Take on c5, you take on h4, take on b4, and compared to the game situation, as we will see in just a few seconds, you have about 2 or 3 extra tempis, which will allow you to get back in the game, get back in time to catch the b pawn. Knight to f2 being the best move in the position, king to c5, knight to f5, you go b4, then I go knight to d3, king to c4, then I pick up the pawn on b2, and I will be able to sacrifice a knight for this b pawn. You're not even close, by the way. So this was needed. After a very long think, in fact, he played the move knight ge3, which is a double question mark move. In fact, it loses on the spot. Because now I take on b4. I force you to take on c5, which clears the path for my pawn. You take on h4, and now I just push. Push. You want to take my piece? Go right ahead. You're not catching that pawn. There's no way to bring the knights back in time. I'm going to go bishop to e4 next move, and I'm just simply going to push b7, b8. If you can find a way to get back in time with the knights, let me know. You've solved chess. King e7, he's trying to get back in time with the king, b6, king d7, bishop to c6, king c8, and knight to e6. The problem is I also have this knight, and you're not going to be able to stop the checkmate. Knight to g4, b7, king to b8, king to b6, knight c5, knight d7, knight c5, knight a6, knight f8, knight d7 is coming. I'm touching either the a6 or the d7 square. And that's all she wrote. That finishes the game. And in fact, it was this particular game that gave victory to Team USA after 4 draws on the board between Team India and Team Uzbekistan. That allowed Team USA to get closer to the favorites and the leaders of the competition, Team India. Right now, they're 2 points behind them, 2 match points behind them. That's 1 victory, and they're playing tomorrow. I cannot wait to see the matches tomorrow. We have USA versus India and China versus Uzbekistan. This one is going to be absolutely fire. See you guys tomorrow. Cheers.